potentially maybe we sneak up and steal some of that meal business, which would be great for the United States. Hello, this is Justin McKinney with Comstock Investments. Today we had Secretary Brooke Rollins out, normally giving us a highlight reel of what the USDA and the administration has done recently. However, there was a little bit more meat on the bone today, and that's welcome for her speeches. We will be seeing $2 billion in the Emergency Commodity Assistance Program funding that will be delivered later this week. That was a big announcement. The other was expanding trade and market access. You know, we had market access. We have lost market access. I don't know what these trade missions are going to do, how quickly we're going to get trade done. But China continues to elude and show that they are not going to step in and buy soybeans at this time with the current trade deal that we have in place. So that's going to be a key driver in the soybean market moving forward. Also, Argentina had their tax holiday and they ended up filling their $7 billion relatively quickly, mostly Chinese purchases. And we will take a deeper dive into that subscriber only portion of our written report. If you'd like to take a look at that, please reach out and touch base with us. We can get you hooked up with that. Again, Secretary Rollins, we've heard these rumors many times about incentivizing farmers and ranchers to retain heifers to help control the beef price. Yet, there was no announcement of that. We did hear that there was promise of an October rollout of a beef revitalization plan focusing on risk management and land use, but nothing on the payments for retaining heifers, which I don't believe anybody in the industry is looking forward to if they do have any of those payments out there. So those were the highlights. Again, a little bit more meat on the bone, but pretty vague. On corn exports, we ended up with a 75.7 million bushels. That was above expectations, a record pace so far, up 75% year over year, averaging 48.5 million bushels per week versus last year's 26.9. We only need 37.9 million bushels per week to hit the USDA's 2.975 billion bushel target. Last year at this same time, we needed to hit 44.5. So the key buyer, Mexico. We can look at Mexico as a buyer, well above the 5-year average, well above last year's pace. And where's that corn going? Obviously, we've talked many times about the border being closed and the need to import corn to feed those cattle. We're hearing that those cattle are getting extremely fat and they're going to need to do something with them relatively quick. So will Mexico continue to be as strong a buyer moving forward? Time will only tell. But boy, we sure have a blistering pace of these corn exports, and at least enough to put a little bit of pause into this market on top of the yield reports that are coming in. Hearing from around the country, disappointing yields. Maybe they're at APH or slightly above, but still disappointing considering what everybody was budgeting or at least thinking that they had as little as 6 weeks ago. On the soybean side of the world, we ended up with 26.6 million bushels sold, the low end of the trade expectations. Commitments only at 404 million bushels. That's down 37% and the lowest in 17 years. Again, Argentina with their tax holiday did not help anything. We're going to need to find a place to sell some soybeans, and we're going to need to find it pretty quick. Will we end up exporting those soybeans to Argentina or Brazil? I would highly doubt that we export them to Brazil, but it surely is possible that later in the season, Argentina will end up being a buyer so that they can have the beans to crush as they have the capacity to crush those meal plants. But in the short term, those beans are going out as whole beans. Potentially, maybe we sneak up and steal some of that meal business, which would be great for the United States, as we have expanded that meal capacity over the last couple of years. So moving forward, we need to average 25.6 million bushels per week to hit that 1.685 billion bushel target. You know, our top buyers, Taiwan, Mexico, Egypt, unknown. It's still going to be a tall task to order without any sort of Chinese buying. We really need to get something done here pretty quick on that, or we are going to have a back glut of beans to deal with. On the wheat side of things, we came in at 19.8 million bushels. That was the top end of the range and the best in 4 weeks. Outstanding commitments of 501 million bushels. That's up 24% year over year and the highest in 9 years. We've been trying to form a bottom in this wheat market. I know Eric's talked about it on our subscriber-only videos many times, that if we could get a bottom in this wheat market, maybe we could finally see corn do something. It's hard to tell. Russia has reportedly touted the idea of doubling their export tax to try to increase revenues for next year. Maybe we'll continue to get some of that business, but at the time, the wheat market just really doesn't have much desire to do a whole heck of a lot here this morning. So as we take away on the grain side of things, we do have the quarterly stocks report coming up. That'll come out the end of September. The key to watch there is what do they do with the stocks numbers? Will there be some sort of adjustment in feed and residual? We'll take a look at that more in depth in our written reports and our subscriber only reports. On the protein sector side of things, we ended up having excellent hog sales today. Again, we have a hog and pig report out today at 2 o'clock. Brian will dive into that tomorrow, so we'll have those numbers available for you tomorrow. At the current time of recording this, we don't quite have those yet. So moving forward, pork sales came in at 29,400 metric tons. That's up 34% versus last week, 12% on the 4-week. So when we take a look at the pork exports here, you can see we're holding on schedule with the 5-year and last year's. It would be nice to see some spike up in that. But again, we'll need to get more data from the hog and pig report to see how big this pig crop is moving forward. On the cattle front, we had another week of disappointing exports. 8,400 metric ton. That's down 47% versus last week, 42% on the 4-week. I don't think it's much of a surprise at these lofty levels that our export program has virtually dried up. What happens when President Trump calls Brazilian President Lula? Do we see a tariff reduction? Do we drop that tariff? I don't know. But I do know that President Trump generally does not like negative headlines. We've had many negative headlines about the beef price. It would not surprise me if they do come to some sort of agreement on those tariffs. We'll see how that unfolds as the week finishes out and we start next week. But that's what we had today on the export side of the world. This has been Justin McKinney with Comstock Investments.
Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.